What up? T-Bob here.
And Jake as well.
And look at you. You done stumbled upon little OTB Saints, where we bring you all the latest black and gold coverage.
Who are the Saints going to draft? Who's going to be their quarterback? What does the salary cap look like? All that information and more.
Hope you enjoy it. Like, subscribe.
To talk about the Saints right now, I want to bring in my guy, Ross Jackson from Locked On Saints. Ross, how are you this morning?
Hey, buddy, I'm doing great. Glad to be here with you. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, it was a late night for everyone who stayed up and watched the NFL draft, but well worth it. You know, before we dive into the Saints pick, Ross, let me get your thoughts on the draft in Detroit. I mean, it was packed to the brim on TV. What did you think about that?
Yeah, they said it was nearly like a quarter or over a 250,000 people or something like that there. That's absolutely insane. So I was really excited about it. They drummed up a lot of excitement around it, too. I think the city of Detroit did a really good job being ready for this. State of Michigan did a really good job being ready for this. Governor Whitmer was like all over, promoting and everything like that and talking about how important this is for the city. And for a city that's probably not going to host a Super Bowl anytime soon, being able to show that they're a good destination for the NFL draft is really, really cool. So it's cool to see.
All right, Ross, Saints fans were sitting there patiently waiting in the first round. Were they going to trade up? Were they going to trade back? What were they going to do? They stayed put at 14, which I think was the correct decision. They take Talise Fuaga, the tackle out of Oregon State, who can kind of play everywhere on the offensive line. What was your thoughts on this selection?
Yeah, I got to say I agree that standing pat at 14, letting the draft come to them was the right strategy. That was a good move by New Orleans, not being in, a panic situation when they saw, Olu Fashanu go off the board a little bit earlier and things like that. And so, my immediate impressions of the pick is that this obviously has a big time impact for them in 2024, especially with the looming question marks around incumbent starting right tackle Ryan Ramczyk. There's health question marks that are sort of lingering around his 2024 and lingering around his career at this point. And so getting a guy like Fuanga that's going to be able to come in and maybe have, an opportunity to start immediately at the right tackle spot. And he's a player that's pro-ready, kind of plug-and-play ready to do that if called upon. And he fits scheme-wise in terms of what it is the New Orleans Saints are wanting to do when it comes to wide zone. They ran a ton of wide zone. I think he had a ton of zone run last year. I think he had more than 2 times the amount of zone blocking snaps than man blocking snaps last year. And 41.5% of their carries last year went outside the tackles. So it's a really good matchup and a really good kind of cohesion for what it is that the New Orleans Saints are trying to install this offseason.
Now, as far as where he's going to fit on this offensive line, I mean, obviously it was right tackle, but, there were a lot of analysts out there that projected him as guard. I mean, where do you think obviously right tackle is going to be his first opportunity, but, I mean, where do you think he sticks, or do you think he kind of bounces around?
No, I think that he could potentially bounce around, but it wouldn't be because of where the Saints see his fit. They're pretty clear on where they see his fit. They see him as a tackle, and then right tackle could be the most immediate impact that he could have if Ryan Ramczyk is unable to go to start 2024 and beyond, or potentially beyond. The tricky part is if Ryan Ramczyk surprises, it does end up being ready to start the season, then maybe you can see Fuanga find a spot on the interior at left guard or something like that, at least for the time being, until he eventually takes over the right tackle spot. So I would say that right tackle is kind of the vision for the future. What the short term holds is all going to depend upon what the makeup of the rest of the roster and the rest of the unit around it looks like.
Now, what about the left tackle spot? Because this is a guy that's certainly talented. We talked about him tackling guard, but he's pretty much been on the right side. Could he slide over to left?
He seems to be pretty confident about it. I mean, anytime you talk to some offensive line guys out there, some of the greatest, offensive linemen or offensive line minds, they'll tell you that moving to the opposite side of the line is like asking a right-handed pitcher to go out there and throw lefty. It's like it'd be a little challenging for guys, but he seemed pretty comfortable with it. He mentioned that some folks look at it as, driving on the other side of the freeway, for instance, but for him, he seemed like he was pretty comfortable with the idea. So it could be an option for him, but I think the Saints really want to see Trevor Penning pan out there, and I think they're excited about what he could potentially look like under the tutelage of John Benton, their new offensive line coordinator, offensive line coach, as well as the new system that they're installing over on the offensive side, which is going to play heavily to Trevor Penning's movement ability and run blocking tenacity as well. So best case scenario for New Orleans is that Fuanga is ready to go at right tackle and that Trevor Penning has kind of fit in the new scheme at left tackle.
All right, Ross, everybody seems to agree that they like this first-round pick, but, with James Hurst retiring, that kind of gave you even more need on the offensive line, and a lot of people were questioning, hey, did they go double offensive line in round 1 and round 2? Obviously, receiver something that's been mocked to them a lot at 45. Where do you think the Saints go in round 2?
Yeah, I think it's one of those spots. There's a chance that, defensive interior is there. Like if, surprisingly, Johnny Newton fell out of the first round, the big defensive tackle out of Illinois. If he somehow lands on the board in a spot where the Saints are comfortable moving up or even can stick and pick him, I think that ends up being very, very, very attractive for them. But yeah, I could see either one of those two spots. And we know the New Orleans Saints love their day 2 defensive backs too. So that's obviously a position that I just always watch out for them when it comes to the second day. Although Joe Wood said yesterday that they feel pretty comfortable about their starters, obviously, when it comes to their secondary. So I think that there's a good chance that you could see them go into your offensive line here again at 45. I don't think there's anything wrong with that either. And it was a position they were going to have to address one way or another, because even if James Hurst had not retired, you were still probably looking for a starter at that spot and allowing James Hurst to be your key depth guy, your 6th offensive lineman. So with some big names still out there, like Will Frazier coming out of West Virginia, surprisingly, Jackson Powers Johnson out of Oregon, which would be an absolute steal at 45, equivalent to when Eric McCoy fell to the second round, and the Saints were able to take advantage of that. I think interior offensive line offers a lot of opportunity if the board continues the way that it is right now.
Yeah, now as far as defense goes, Ross Jackson with Locked On Saints joining us right now. Outside of D-line, which is something that everyone's talking about as being a need, what are your biggest needs on defense outside of that in your mind?
Yeah, I think safety is a spot that you can address. You lost Marcus May, or you moved on from Marcus May after he appeared in only 17 games over the past 2 seasons. I think that's a spot you can look. They've got Jonathan Abram as a guy who played incredibly well next to Tyrann Mathieu the last 2 games of the season last year. I think that he's probably going to be the guy that maybe gets the kind of first run at that starting spot next to Tyrann. But, you've got the young guy in Jordan Houghton as well, even though they see him as a little bit more of a deep safety kind of post Tyrann Mathieu days. So I think that, you could see them potentially invest in safety at some point. I don't think it would be wrong for them to invest in corner. I don't think that an investment at that position really says anything is imminent around all the, wacky, Marshawn Lattimore trade rumors. I just think that you don't really have a lot of cornerbacks on the roster. And so getting more youth there, knowing that Paulson Adebo is going into a contract year, all that, I think that, cornerback's a spot where you could definitely address as well. I think those would be the 2 big ones for me outside of defensive line. I'm pretty confident with what the Saints are at linebacker right now.
Yeah, now Ross, as far as the mid-rounds go, after 45, you don't have a pick till the 5th round, but you have 4 fifth-round picks. If you're the Saints, do you trade some of those fifth-round picks, or do you stay where you're at and say, look, I'm going to grab as many of these guys as I can and hope one of them sticks?
Yeah, I think you might try to move up. If the right prospect is there on the board, like if I'm the Saints and I don't go wide receiver at 45, I might be tempted to package a couple of those 5th-round picks and move up in the 4th if there's a wide receiver that falls, particularly, a possession guy. There's not a lot of those guys in this year's draft, particularly on the outside, like perimeter possession receivers. A lot of those guys, a lot of the players in this year's draft are either Z flankers that line up over on the strong side, or they're slot guys. And you're looking for a big possession guy to be the weak side option and all that. And I don't think that there's a ton of those in this year's draft. And so a lot of them went off the board in the first round. But a guy like, Keon Coleman, could be there at 45. But if you don't go there, I like a Brendan Rice out of USC and potentially trading up for him. You get a big-bodied possession guy that can run routes. Surprise, surprise, Jerry Rice's son knows how to run routes. And of course, you potentially get Jerry Rice around your young wide receivers every now and then, which for me, that's worth a draft pick in any situation. And so that could be a situation where I could see the New Orleans Saints potentially moving up. And of course, moving up again for defensive back, that's always a place where they like to be aggressive.
Now, as far as pass catchers go, Ross, obviously receivers a big need, but, tight end's something that you've heard some whispers about. I mean, there's tight ends they could target here in the later rounds.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, there's a couple of my favorites are still on the board right now, with Brock Bowers being the only one to come off as we expected in the first round. Jatavian Sanders out of Texas is hyper athletic, kind of a guy that can be a big time playmaker for you at the position. He's probably a day 2 guy, a day kind of, I'll call it like borderline day 2, early day 3 guy would be Theo Johnson out of Penn State, one of my favorite prospects in this year's draft, kind of untapped potential because, Penn State doesn't throw the ball very much. And so they certainly, when they do, they're not throwing to the tight ends. And so finding an opportunity for him where he has sort of that untapped potential at receiver or pass catcher, but is, really stout, heavy in the bottom half and can anchor well in the blocking game. I think that those things help you translate at that position quickly to the NFL. And so I could see, guys like that potentially being intriguing for them. But I feel like tight end is one of those positions that the Saints should and very likely will address in this year's draft.
Now, Ross, if they don't go receiver at all in this draft for whatever reason, they don't like the guys, the board doesn't fall the way they want, what do you see them doing? I mean, are they just going to dip into free agency, or could you see them getting active here with some trades before the season?
Yeah, I think the trade market would be a little tough because kind of the bigger wide receivers are the ones that are, have that conversation about being on the move. But we'll see, right? I mean, if they don't hit at wide receiver, but another team that has a veteran wide receiver on the final year of a relatively cheap deal, a relatively affordable deal, does hit on a receiver, then maybe that receiver becomes available. So it could be interesting to see how that gets active. They don't have a ton of, they probably want to maintain a little bit of their draft capital in 2025, but if you can trade, a future pick, if you will, there's an opportunity to maybe do that. But I still look at, the fact that like Hunter Renfrow is available and that the Saints do have some big-bodied options in Equinemius St. Brown and A.T. Perry, and they brought in Cedric Wilson this offseason as well. They could potentially find that other possession guy at the X spot, the kind of weak side spot. But I wouldn't be surprised to at least see them tackle the position a little bit more in free agency. And certainly we'll see what they can bring in undrafted free agency as well. They've been pretty good at scouting those wide receivers in that area.
Wow, just amazing black and gold takes right there, Jake.
I don't think I've ever heard any takes that are better than the two guys that just gave you that take.
And you can keep getting them by going ahead and liking, subscribing, ringing the bell to get notifications when we post. Have a great day. We'll see you on the next OTB Saints.